Yeah, hello everyone, Nervin Rex here, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing something different. So yeah, basically we're going to be reacting to a movie review. Well, not much of a review because this video is about you know pointing out the historical misconceptions on the historical movie. Now the video I'm reacting to is about the latest movie on Netflix called All Quiet on the Western Front. Now, I know this isn't the first time they've made a movie on All Quiet on the Western Front, which is based on a book, and there are a few other earlier versions, like one in the 1970s and earlier on. But it's yeah, let's just this version, the 2022 version, is absolutely my favorite. I loved it. Everything from the cinematography, the camera works, the acting, absolutely fantastic. And also what I really love about this movie is that it's it's not Hollywood, we're heroes, let's save the day type of war movie. It's a more realistic war movie that shows the harsh reality of war. It's not about a bunch of guys being all glorious and heroic. It's about reality. Now there are some parts of the movie that were a bit, non-realistic. But everything else about the movie is amazing. Absolutely incredible. From a scale of 1 to 10, I give it a 5. But anyway, that's enough with me ranting. Let's just get on with the review, shall we?
Philosopher Bertrand Russell once said, "Hold on. I'm still recovering from this movie. That last shot, man, that was haunting. Beautiful."
Yeah, I agree. The last scene in the movie was sad yet beautiful at the same time. Now in the book, All Quiet on the Western Front, the movie first takes place in 1915, but in the movie it takes place in 1917. So yeah, that was something I kind of sort of didn't like. However, they made up for that in the content of the movie. So yeah.
But haunting. The world, it just looks so different now. Colors seem duller, yet everything somehow feels more vibrant than before. Anyways, where was I? Oh, Bertrand Russell. Yeah, that dude once said, "War does not determine who is right, only who is left." A very apt quote from watching a film from the perspective.
Yep, that's absolutely true. War doesn't choose its winners because they're morally right. It chooses its winners because they're the only ones left alive. So yeah.
Perspective of a protagonist who was part of our then adversary. All Quiet on the Western Front ensures that the audience's rose-colored glasses are not only discarded, but tossed onto the front lines of the battlefield, only to be immediately shattered by the splattering of oncoming fire. Basically, this movie is brutal, but that's exactly what a modern-day war movie should be, because it's based on the very real First World War. There are many elements of the film that are taken right from the history books, and some were given a little creative color. We're here to break down which parts of the movies are factual and which parts of the movie were made up for the story. Although we can't spoil World War I, we can spoil part of the story. Anyways, I'm Joey C. Let's go! The film follows a bright-eyed young man named Paul, a German kid who is so eager to enroll in the army with his friends that he lies about his age in order to do so. Their excitement is...
Now, in regards to young minors lying about their age to get in the army, back then that was an actual thing. In the British Army during World War I, there were lots of young teenage boys who joined in the army, and even before World War I. There was lots of wars that had underage people. But anyway, let's continue.
Palpable, as they are giddy throughout the process of enlisting, trying on uniforms and singing calls to arms while marching towards Warzone. Paul seems like the average exuberant young man who just so happens to get swept up in the intoxicating nationalistic fever surrounding him. In fact, we don't really know anything about him. He's essentially a blank slate, and that's on purpose. Paul represents the average everyday kid that joined the war effort in the early 1900s, helping the viewer empathize with Paul.
Now, I've never read the book. A book personally, but I do know a little bit about the book. So yeah, I love how we don't really know anything about Paul BAUMER, since the author is supposed to make him represent the average citizen who just volunteers for the army. No one really knows him, and will probably never know him. So yeah.
And put themselves in his muddy trench-soaked boots. But that's not to say he wasn't based on a real person. The film All Quiet on the Western Front was adapted by a novel written by German World War I veteran Erich Maria Remarque. Remarque was a veteran of World War I as well, so his accounts of the horrors on the battlefield are firsthand. In the film, Paul joins the 78th Reserve Infantry Regiment, but in real life, the German army had the 78th Reserve Division, which fought battles on the Eastern Front rather than Western. So yes, Paul's story was—
Oh really? I didn't know that. Wow, that's surprising.
Created for the novel, and is not related to a specific person, but his story feels as real and impactful as any other.
I'm sure you've seen this knight once or twice before. You know he fails each time. And now
another person in the
Wait, what? Oh, what did the narrator said?
And is not related to a specific person, but his story feels as real and impactful as any other.
Yep, absolutely. When I watched this movie, I was just so intrigued with Paul BAUMER and his comrades and comrades' journey throughout the war, and it just felt so surreal, you know?
Another person in the film included that was ripped straight from the history books is MATTHIAS ERZBERGER. He was a German politician from the Center Party who eventually started to speak out against World War I. He was also the authorized representative of the Reich government and responsible for signing the formal agreement between the German and Allied forces to stop fighting. As a man that played a pivotal role in helping end the First World War, ERZBERGER came from Germany's more progressive political party and was known as a figurehead of peace. However, he frequently voiced his opposition to the Conservative Party. After the war in 1921, he was assassinated by a group of men who went on to form the SS under Adolf Hitler. The first signing of the armistice subplot is a real will they, won't they scenario, where it seems like every time they are close to ending the war, one side says, psych, and they decide to renegotiate terms. Almost this entire plot line is filmed on a train, as the Allied and German forces ultimately sign the armistice in a railway.
Yep, that's true. The armistice was signed inside a train in France.
A carriage owned by the Supreme Commander, French Marshal Foch. While the characters in these scenes represent real people from the time, the conversations we see between them were never actually recorded. According to director Edward Berger, the way that they informed those scenes was by analyzing how similar wartime protocols were executed from historical references. The rest of it is just some good old-fashioned Hollywood dialogue. General Friedrichs is arguably one of the villains of the movie. He was kind of like Mrs. Trenchbull. They're both German, sadistic, and delight in the pain.
Now, while I was watching the movie, and I think many people can relate to me who has watched this movie. When they were watching scenes of him, they felt like, dude, come on, you're such an idiot, just sue for peace. But in reality, he was not an idiot. He was what's the term? What's the word? He represents how most German officers feel that before the armistice was signed, and many other officers, both on the Allies and the Central Powers, to try and inflict as much pain as possible on the opposite side before the armistice went into effect. So yeah.
pain and anguish of the younger generations. But if you thought that mustache was a bit too good to be true, you were right. It turns out there was never a General Friedrichs in the German army. But much like Paul's character, General Friedrichs was based on the other generals at the time who chose not to take the peace treaty very seriously. Interestingly enough, there was a man with very similar ambitions to Friedrichs, but he was actually on the Allied side, General John Pershing. He was a commander in the American force, who apparently never gave his men the command to halt fire. By that time, there was so much bad blood on both sides of the war that many soldiers were willing to exterminate as many enemy forces as they could before the clock struck 11 a.m. on November 11th, when they were ordered to stop the bloodshed. On the day of the peace treaty, many soldiers celebrated because it meant they could return home to their lives, although with physical and emotional scars they sustained while at war. But because the order was to halt the fighting by 11 a.m. on the 11th of November, up until that time the war ravaged on and remained just as bloody and brutal as it had been prior.
That's absolutely true. Statistics say that over 3,000 or possibly more were killed during the final hours of the war, trying to inflict as much pain as possible.
Apparently, 11,000 soldiers lost their lives that day, with many soldiers dying just minutes before the peace treaty was enforced. Allegedly, many of the deaths were recorded as having occurred on November 10th, so as to hide the embarrassment from the soldiers' families. And it is on the 11th of November that our protagonist Paul, after having survived countless battles and attacks on his life, is finally taken out by the bayonet of a French soldier. By this point, the audience is bonded to him, but he nonetheless becomes one of the many casualties of war, left dead on the cold, dark battlefield.
I almost cried during that scene, because, throughout the movie, we've mostly stuck with Paul and his friends, and thus we've made a sort of connection with Paul. It was very sad to see him die like that, but it also represents the many soldiers on both sides who died before the war ended.
Over against the walls of the trench he first fought in as a defender, but will now pass away as an invader. Jesus, this freaking film, man, is crazy. One of the first sequences of the film that introduces us to Paul is when we see him getting fitted for his army uniform. He attempts to return his uniform, as it still has another man's name attached to it, but they return it to him with the likely false excuse that the uniform must have been too small for the other soldier. They then take the former owner's name tag and toss it on the floor, where it joins a handful of other name tags, likely the majority of which belong to soldiers who have already fallen. It's another harsh
Fun fact: in the First World War, a lot of people don't know this since they're so focused on the military side, but internally on in every country, there are lots of women unexpectedly took a huge part in the war as well, serving as nurses and doing factory work, etc., etc. Fun fact: during the start of the movie, when you see the woman washing the clothes and fixing the clothes of the dead soldiers only to be reused, that's absolutely true, because it's much cheap. Because fun fact, the sad reality is that it's much cheaper during a war to just reuse and recycle the uniforms of dead soldiers rather than to tailor new ones for the new soldiers. So yeah, you could basically say that some people could say that the uniform was much more valuable than the soldiers at the same time. But anyway, you get what I'm trying to say. Sorry, words are hard. It's just that I'm so intrigued with this video because I love this movie so much.
Harsh reminder that during wartime, human life is no longer considered a precious gift, but instead becomes a tool with the sole purpose of achieving the glory of whatever country it pledges allegiance to. That's
true with all wars.
process of recycling old uniforms was not uncommon. In fact, many of the materials taken from Allied forces were used to create uniforms for the German side, and that's because wool was scarce and humans were not. Oi. The movie.
Yep, absolutely true. That's what I was trying to say earlier.
The movie goes to seemingly painful lengths to portray the harsh living conditions in the trenches. We see buckets everywhere, likely filled with human excrement, limited places to lay down and sleep, and soldiers forced to trudge through thick mud, all while the threat of an artillery or gas attack loomed on the horizon. The soldiers were always at risk of disease and injury as well, whether it be rats carrying some sort of infection or the threat of trench fever. We don't see characters come down with any of these ailments in the film, but we do see soldiers suffer from mental and nervous breakdowns. One of Paul's friends, Albert Kropp, appears to suffer the effects of shell shock and battle hypnosis, which leads him to run directly towards the incoming Allied forces, who then proceeded to torch him with a flamethrower right in front of Paul's eyes. It's one of the more brutal sequences in the film and makes you yearn for shows like House of the Dragon. Yeah, I think I need to go watch Blue's Clues or something after this, because this is sickening.
Lazada 1111. Enjoy fast and free shipping. Shop now!
Fuel for adventure! Modern armored warfare first began during the First World War, and with it came the tanks. In the film, we see the German line watch in equal parts terror and awe as the French tank manages to plow through the trench barrier, killing a handful of Germans with its armor-piercing rounds, and running over others in the process. You can tell in the film that this is one of the first times the Germans witnessed the power of tanks, and it makes sense. Britain and France had only just developed tanks in 1950.
Yep, true. From Britain and France were the first ones to invent and use the tank. The Germans sooner and later. However, the German tanks, compared to the British ones, were much less effective. So whenever a British or French tank was captured, they'd use it. Rather, they would just paint the tank so German soldiers would identify it as their own forces and use it against the French and the British. So yeah.
15 as a way to navigating the barbed wire and other obstacles in no man's land. So the technology was relatively new. They were so powerful that after the final German spring offensives of 1918, when French tanks that were deployed in mass, the stalemate imposed by trench warfare was ended, thus effectively ending the war itself. In the film, German soldiers empty multiple pistol rounds into the incoming tank, a sign that they were unfamiliar with how well protected the tanks were. Huh. Hold on, where have I seen that before? Oh, Tom, you and your endless optimism. One of the more tragic scenes in the film is when Paul and his best wartime friend, Kat, return to a farm they had stolen eggs from earlier in the film. They came back for one more egg heist. They managed to barely escape the farm with eggs in hand, and once they finally have a moment to enjoy the spoils of their effort, Kat goes to take a leak in the forest, and is soon shot by the farmer's young son, sustaining wounds that later kill him. While this particular scenario might not have played out in real life, it is true that soldiers were constantly desperate for a good meal. Germany teetered.
Yep. Back then, food. Back then, during like Second World War, First World War, and many wars before that, food was hard to come by. So soldiers had to. And although you could say, why would you steal from civilians? Well, morally, you'd think they wouldn't do that, but realistically, when people are starving for days, they will do anything just to get a single ounce of food, even if it means stealing from civilians. So yeah, it's sad but true.
On starvation due to the blockade on the import and exports imposed by the British. The last shot of the film is a haunting one. The camera slowly zooms into Paul's now deceased body and focuses on his face, which is completely still. It's almost as if, by no longer being part of the war, Paul has finally achieved a sense of peacefulness, a beautiful yet horrific way to be reminded that the effects of war can only be relinquished by death itself. One final note, it really is remarkable that it's taken almost 100 years for the world to see this story told in its original language. Maybe it's because it would have been quite strange to watch one of America's most notorious enemies be more fully represented in the protagonist of a film. But as we look—
Yep, sometimes what I don't like when watching a movie about another country is that it's still in English rather than that country's native language. Because it removes the diversity and uniqueness and the authenticity of that of the setting of the movie. So yeah, I really loved. That's one of the reasons why I like this movie.
Learn from this particular account, everyone is a hero in their own journey. Nobody chooses where or when they're born. Nobody chooses their individual life circumstances. And nobody chooses to take the life of another human being unless they've been taught that doing so is the right way. Anyways, sorry for the somber video. This film just floored me. And if you haven't already, give it a watch. Just bring some tissues.
Wow, this was such a good video. And in regards to what he just said just now, that's also true. However, what a lot of people don't know is that there's no such thing as there's truly no such thing as a good person. Let's say, for example, someone asked me for help, then I helped them. Then another person asked me for help. However, I cannot help them either due to personal reasons, or I'm unable to be able to fulfill the thing they ask of me. Now, to that person who I refuse to help, they would consider me a bad person. But to the person that I have helped, I would be considered a good person. So in reality, there is no good or bad. It's just how you interpret it. So yeah. But that's all I have to say. I guess I really enjoyed this video. So yeah, if you like this video, please hit that like and subscribe. Check out my Facebook page, link is in the description. And also check out the original video by Screen Rant. I'm sure he makes amazing content, and this is actually my first time watching a video on his channel. So yeah, go check him out. But before you do that, subscribe to me first. And also, I highly recommend you watch the movie All Quiet on the Western Front on Netflix. It's absolutely worth it. Anyway, that's all for today. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!